I was thinking up the different Infucknal devices that can be put into James Grider novels, and the various powers they might have. How about an Infucknal device that allows a person to inflict injury on another by inflicting injury on their own self? First, before you can target another individual with this magic, you have to physically touch that person. Flesh to flesh, skin to skin contact. Just a barest touch, just once. And this touch has to be made with the intention that this is the person you want to target with your Infucknal device. This requirement puts a limit on the power, and there is always some kind of a limit or a requirement that must be satisfied with Infucknal devices in exchange for their magic. Let's say we have a sexy teenage white girl, and this fat, ugly Hispanic bitch in her 40s. If someone were to present the fat woman with this Infucknal device, here is what she will have to do in order to hurt the sexy white girl. She'll first have to sneak a touch on her, just skin-to-skin contact between any of the body parts for a fraction of a second. It doesn't matter which body parts. This has to be done while the fat Hispanic woman is wishing for this white girl to be her victim. Here is what happens next. After this is done, at any time the fat woman injures herself, that injury will also appear on the teenage girl's body at the same time, a duplicate of the injury. It won't matter how far apart these two people happen to be. There is another caveat that comes with using this Infucknal device. In order to project an injury onto the teenage girl, the fat woman who hates white people not only has to inflict the injury onto her own self, the injury must be willingly inflicted, or the injury has to be something that she actually wants. If the fat woman accidentally bruises her shin against a coffee table, that bruise is not going to manifest on the teenage girl's shin as well, because an accidental injury could not have been desired by the fat woman. Only the injuries that she desires for herself will be duplicated on the teenage girl. For example, the fat woman might decide she wants to inflict a bruise on the teenage girl's forehead. She must willingly inflict a bruise on her own forehead, and then in the same place at the same time a bruise will form on the teenage girl's forehead. But there are two more caveats to this power. A woman who uses this Infucknal device can only use it against other women. A man who uses this Infucknal device can only use it on other men. The reason for this is because if a man is using it against a woman, and he wanted to harm the woman's vagina, he would have to harm his own vagina. But wait, he's a man, he doesn't have a vagina. And the final caveat is that the injury inflicted on the person targeted by this Infucknal device will only be half as bad as the injury the Infucknal device user purposely inflicts on their own self. It's such a bitch of a magical power, because you have to hurt yourself in order to remotely hurt someone you hate only half as much. This power appeals mostly to old, ugly people who don't give a shit about how they look, and you'll see why. This fat bitch is so ugly, she doesn't give a shit about how she looks, and for that reason she has no problem willingly scarring herself. But this teenage girl looks hot, and scars are emotionally devastating to her. Therefore, this woman gets off on cutting herself. So, Lesser duplicates of those gashes magically manifest on the teenage girl's body, which causes the teenage girl to be not only physically, but emotionally tortured. So after asking someone to punch her in the forehead, so she and the teenage girl will share the bruise, this fat bitch took out a razor blade and sliced her own cheek. She doesn't care about how her face looks. But as the fat bitch cut her own face, a cut only half the size of the fat bitch's cut magically appeared out of the blue on the teenage girl's face. The teenage girl would be very distressed and horrified, and she won't have a clue how it could have happened. What cut her? Her face just started bleeding on its own. And what's even more horrible is the teenage girl is not aware of this magic, and so she's at a complete loss and in terror of the unknown. The fat bitch then waits until her wound heals into a scar. She doesn't give a shit she has a scar. But the teenage girl has to be tormented that her beautiful face is now spoiled by a scar from a cut that appeared out of nowhere. Well, the fat bitch continues the torture by slicing her own skin below her collarbone. At the same time, the cut manifests on the teenage girl as well. It's like voodoo, where a voodoo doll is hurt and those injuries project on the victim the voodoo doll represents. How is the teenage girl going to keep looking sexy with a scar under her collarbone? It's not going to look good when she wears tank tops. Then a couple of weeks later, the fat bitch asks someone to punch her in the deltoid, so a bruise manifests both on her own and the girl's arm. Then the fat bitch slashes the bruised area with a razor, and the gash also appears on the girl's deltoid. Now the girl is upset she is going to have a third ugly scar on her arm. Why is this happening? How? But before the injury to the deltoid can heal, the fat bitch does something even worse. She goes and gashes her own midriff, which projects a similar bloody gash onto the teenage girl's sexy hard body. The fat bitch doesn't care she is doing this to her body, which is already ugly, but the teenage girl is devastated. How is she going to look sexy in crop tops and bikini tops if her torso now has that awful scar that appeared out of nowhere with no explanation? The fat bitch asks some guy to punch her in the stomach a bunch of times. She doesn't mind the pain or the bruises because it's worth it, since the Infucknal device will project a copy of that pain and bruises onto the teenage girl. And there's no way for the police to solve how this is happening. The teenage girl might be walking along at school and suddenly doubles over in pain because it feels like invisible fists had pummeled her stomach and shoulder. So now she looks like somebody beat her up. How is the teenage girl going to keep looking sexy if the fat bitch decides next to slice a long gash across her own back, causing the teenage girl to gain the same gash as well? This fat bitch could keep slicing up her own face until the teenage girl's face looks hideous. You could also remotely kill someone with this power, and here's how. One way would be to undertake surgery in a hospital, where you volunteer to have a doctor slice you open. Because the teenage girl will not be in a medical environment, but at home, or driving a car, or at soccer practice, she'll bleed to death as the surgeon slices into the fat woman, and the surgical cut suddenly begins manifesting on the girl's body. The fat woman could slit an artery in her wrist, then clamp it off, but as the same injury projects onto the teenage girl's wrist, she won't be prepared for it and will bleed to death. The fat woman could taser her own self, and the teenage girl will feel the electroshock, or at least the pain of it. Imagine the girl is driving and suddenly she feels electroshock. She could crash the car and kill herself. Here's the best part. The fat woman might decide to carve a swastika into her own forehead, because the white girl is a white nationalist, and she thinks it's appropriate to inflict a swastika on this girl's forehead. The fat woman can take OxyContin to manage the pain, then go to a tattoo parlor and tattoo some stupid shit onto her skin, and the girl will start screaming in pain as tattoo scarring begins burning into her skin as if there is an invisible tattoo needle pushing into her. The girl won't have the tattoo ink manifest under her skin, of course, but she'll gain a scar that looks like the tattoo. When you write stories with Infucknal devices like this in them, you can write some fucked up scenarios like this and have the readers masturbate to it. Masturbate to the suffering and distress of a sexy teenage girl as her beauty is slowly being compromised. Imagine the psychological torture of such a scenario, like a gash appearing on your face out of the blue, and a few days later it happens again, and again, and you don't know why. And if the fat woman wants to torture some other chick because she's tired of torturing this one, she just has to touch her next victim while wishing for the Infucknal device to target her, and that's it. But once she transitions to another victim, she will not be able to project injuries onto the previous victim anymore, because the Infucknal device has a limitation that it can only affect one victim at a time. The fat woman will have to touch the previous victim again and redirect the Infucknal device toward her if she wants to return to torturing her.